So my 8 minutes are up, and this object is now set in alginate. You can see I'd already started another object, which was a bone I had in the studio. And I'm going to just cast one more thing, and I'm just going to go through the whole process really quickly. I'm not going to go crazy. I'm just going to do it in front of you and get it done efficiently. Just so that we have a couple of different kinds of objects to work with. It's probably a little fuller than I should have gone, but I'm going to make it work. A little bit of water. There we go. I feel good about that. Quickly come in and clean up my chopsticks. Get the old alginate off of those. Any little random fragments and bits that might get lodged in my stuff. There we go. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get the mixing. Well, before I do that, I'm going to set my timer. Okay. Oh, I don't want to start it yet. I just want to have it ready. I'm going to go ahead and do my mix. Great. Want to make sure you're doing this in a space that's not too clean or precious. Maybe a kitchen table, maybe a desk. You could put a little bit of cardboard down or something. You just want to make sure that it's a surface that you don't mind getting a little sloppy. You'll be able to mostly clean it up, but you want to be on the safe side and not put it down on anything that's going to warp or is precious to you. So be thoughtful about how you sort of choose your space. So there it is. I'm almost mixed up. No problem. You guys know the whole drill now. Have one part alginate, 1 part water by volume. Excellent. Mixed up right around 15 seconds. This time I'm going to throw something a little bit more complicated in here, and that's going to give us an opportunity to examine what makes something like this problematic. There we go, and I'm just going to run this across here so that it doesn't actually sink to the bottom. So I just put that object in. I'm going to hit my start button, and I'm going to let it set up. Now while that's setting, while the 8 minutes are sort of counting off, what I want to do is go back and look at some of the other objects I've cast. Now here's my finger. This is great. This is ready to go. But this one, we can't, as we've already pointed out, this is that little sort of ring that had the little sort of pieces coming off of it. That I can't just pull out of here. It's locked in now by the alginate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen the mold from the cup. I'm going to try and get the alginate to release the cup, and you can kind of hear it desuction as I do that. And maybe I can just plop it out like that. There's my alginate mold in the shape of my cup. You can see I got a little bit of powder on top. Now I happen to know that the orientation of that ring that I put inside, it's actually a little gear-like ring, is oriented like this. Okay? So I know that if I cut and I can even see a piece of it right there. I didn't quite do a good enough job creating I didn't do good enough job getting a good space, a good buffer of mold making material. So bad Michael. But it's going to be okay because we're actually going to toss it back in the cup for casting. My experiment here is that I'm just going to use this little sort of device that you use in ceramics, and I'm just going to cut at my mold like this. Now the nice thing is the object that I'm casting here is really quite durable. It's a heavy-duty thing. I'm not going to damage it with this tool. I can actually feel it coming in contact with the ring. And once I've made some preliminary cuts, I'm just going to peel it in half gently. Just like that. Now it's going to tear some, and it might not be perfect, but we're hoping it's going to be okay. This is our experiment phase. Okay, I'm going to, oh, I see I cut there. Well, let's recut that so that it's a little bit more in line with the rest of my mold. Okay, just pull it in half, and voila. There we go. Okay, so you can see that the two parts of this have actually done a good job of casting this side and the hollow side. Now, we did get an air bubble. We did get an air bubble right here. That air bubble that was trapped in there and right here prevented that whole sort of like device, or that whole sort of like ring, the negative space in that ring from filling up. The air bubble stopped that. So what we're going to try to do is gently put it back together so that it fits precisely the way it should. And we're going to pour gently our plaster down back into that hole. We're going to see if we can pour a reasonable thin plaster and shake it and tap it and work the plaster down into the mold, if we can get it to fill that really delicate cavity. I have a feeling we're going to have some issues, but it's worth an experiment, because that's what this is all about, is experimentation and what's possible with the mold. I think we're going to end up with some issues where the plaster doesn't flow super effectively all the way down to the bottom part of the mold. I have a funny feeling we're going to get it to pour part way down the mold, and then it's going to sort of like it's going to sort of develop a little vacuum issue, and we're not going to get it to fill the whole thing. But hey, we're going to try it. So that mold is great. We're going to slap it back in the cup. We're going to press it all the way to the bottom and tap it, and now that mold is ready to go, and it's sort of like torn in half. Now, the other one I put together is right here. This was a deer bone, and it's got lots and lots of undercuts as well. It's not geometric. It's a lot more complicated. And we're going to see if we can pull it out. We can. Ooh, and look, this is not a good sign. This is a situation where I didn't do a good enough job mixing my material. So make sure you're using your tool that you're mixing with to really catch the edges. That's important. I know that the bone runs roughly this direction. Okay, I'm going to just go ahead and cut across like that, up the other side, and to there. Now we're going to see, now again, the bone is tough. It's not a delicate thing. So the tearing in half of the mold is probably going to be complicated, but we're probably going to preserve. We're going to, already we're getting some tear out, some places where the mold is grabbing our bone. Where the alginate is grabbing our bone and preventing it from releasing easily. But hey, the whole point was to try something experimental here. Love the experimental. If you want to come back and do this in a way where you get absolute precision, that's where you'll come back to our casting and mold making class. Now the other thing I want to do, now that I've extracted the bone, I want to show you something. Right here, you can see that the alginate got stuck in that little sort of like vacancy that exists where the spinal column goes in this kind of a skeleton. So there's actually a piece of alginate stuck right in that hole. I can push that out with something probably. Yep, just pop it out like that. And I've got a little sort of like alginate casting of that part of the bone. But it wasn't something I was able to extract cleanly. But I do have an interesting form to play with. We're going to see if we can't get the plaster to take some part of that shape. Before I do that though, on this one, I'm going to widen the spout a little bit going down. And what that means is I want to make the opening where I'm pouring the plaster a little bigger. I've decided I just want to see if I can do a better job of getting the plaster down into the heart of the mold with less problem. We're going to see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and toss that back in that cup, tap it, great. And so that mold is ready to be poured. We're going to see what happens with that one. Now, just to reiterate, if I poured a new cup of fresh alginate here, I could also put this ring in like that, as I mentioned before, and press it in just right up to the very lip of that ring and let it set, and then pull it out. Oh, the piece I was doing before is now finished. This one is now set, so we have yet another one ready to go, another experiment. But anyway, this can pull out like that, and I could just pour it into the top of that. I could pour it right into the top of that mold. That mold would be something more like a press mold. You could just pour into it, pull out your, we might even try that before the day is over, where you sort of push this in, let the alginate set, pull it out, and then just over and over again, you can cast forms in there because you're not having to sort of pull the form apart, put it back together, pull the mold apart, put it back together. So anyway, here we go. We have 4 different molds set up and ready to experiment with. This is what I love, is this deep experimentation, seeing what happens when I crack something apart and try and put it back together. This is a technique, by the way. You can do this in a much more elegant way so that you don't run the risk of sort of tearing everything apart. But for now, we're going quick and simple.